Hello guys, welcome back to Dharma Geosphere. Today we'll be interacting on the contribution of American geographers. Very interesting group of geographers who wrote so well about geography and made many of those geography texts actually as literary texts and are being included as in fact one of the most best written texts in geography. So this is the penultimate part of the contributions of various geographers. We have now just left with the Russian geographers, and from there we'll move on. So I just picked about 10 important American geographers. Of course, Harshon and all that I will deal later, though they are one of the greatest American geographers. So we start off with Geoffrey Martin, whom I discussed about in my first lecture, that he was one of the best. He studied the whole human geography aspects as well as the physical geography for years, and has written several books and rewritten them, and it was widely read by various stakeholders and geographers and very well appreciated. It's a book called the All Possible Worlds, which also deals with the geographical thought evolution and the contribution of various geographers in one of the best narratives and texts at least I have ever read. The book costs around 8,000, but once you are settled, you go to Labasna and you still find geography as interesting as it was when you were studying. You please possess that book. It is worth a buy. It's one of the most amazingly written books about the entire geography, and in particular the most authentic way of talking about the way geography evolved in America. So you all have heard about Devlin Davies. He's one of my favorite geographers. In fact, like me, he basically moved from geology to geography. When he was a geologist, he contributed on the cycle of erosion, which is one of the most standard and most revered and always referred concept in geology. Of course, he had not a very good childhood, nor a good personal life, losing two of the three wives he had. In spite of that, he was an extraordinary scholar of geography. He was in Harvard for more than 8 years, and then there is hardly any university which has not invited him for a lecture or for his interaction. So he was immensely popular, not only for his lectures, but for his uncanny and perfect writing. So he was the one who actually developed geography beyond the degree stage. He was part of the committee, and he kept on insisting that if geography has to flourish, it has to be included in schools. So he was the one who is responsible, solely responsible for geography being introduced in the school, and from there geography really took off in the American study circles and elsewhere. He was an amazing drawer of geography diagrams. He drew more than 10,000 diagrams. He traveled widely, and he saw so many river systems and mountain systems, based on which he proposed his theory of cycle of erosion based on structure, process, and how the landforms evolved. So while he was teaching and while he was drawing on the board, he used both hands. So he could, on the one side, depict how the river moved through the U stage, cutting through the gorges and the mountains and how would you create that deep waterfalls, etc. On the other hand, you describe with his right hand how the valleys and the gullies got widened as the river moved towards the mature stage. So he was ambidextrous and a very, very powerful and impactful teacher, and he was so strict in his class that he would simply throw away students who try to give similes and metaphors while understanding the geological landforms. He was very clear that your perception should be three-dimensional and you should only understand it that way and not try to describe it through English or through any other shortcuts. So he was clear, he was straight, he was simple, he was very effective teacher of geography, and the way he evolved geography and the way he spread it, no one else could ever teach. So he's been a great, great contributor as far as the geography is concerned. And after him you have Jefferson, who equally enkindled enthusiasm of learning among children about geography. He was the one who said geography is nothing but on the one hand it is art, and the other hand it is science. So that's how he brought in students who were interested in science, who were interested in arts, back to geography, and he really enkindled and rekindled and put geography as one of the important subjects in the curriculum. And later came another American, one of the most well-traveled, one of the most talked about, and one of the most influential environmental determinist. You all may have heard. She is no one but the Ellen Churchill Semple. I'll tell a small narrative about her. She was from America but wanted to go and learn with Raztel. So she traveled all the way in horses along with her troop and reached Germany to learn from Raztel. But Raztel straight away refused because women were not allowed in the classrooms, women were not taught. So he said, I cannot do anything, I cannot help you, I cannot teach you, because the rule says that I cannot tell a woman. And he was also afraid that she straight away came all the way from America to meet him. So but she didn't give up. She went and met the Dean, and Dean was also afraid. How come all the way from America when a girl has come and she is insisting that she should be taught, where there is no policy to teach girl students. Then he called the senior faculty and tried to discuss with them and find a solution. And finally, after a lot of discussion, and as Semple was continuously insisting that she has come all the way and she has to be taught, so they take a decision that there will be some kind of a partition in the classroom, the one you see when you go to a doctor or in some of the rooms where there are wooden partitions with screens. So they put that partition. They said that we will now allow you till you complete your course with Raztel, as long as you sit outside the partition and do not see the boys. Neither will the boys be able to see, nor will Raztel be able to see, nor you will be able to see Raztel. You will just sit outside the partition near the door and just listen to Raztel. So she agreed, and that's how she she was so committed and determined to learn from Raztel that she learned like that by sitting separately. After the class, she would go away from there, and from the other side, the boys would go. So this was the arrangement, and she was so determined that Raztel had to finally accept her as a student. She learned, and from there she traveled. She compared how people from various climate zones live and what are their habits and all that. When we talk about the determinism, I'll tell you the kind of examples she gives. But more than all this, she was an excellent writer. She was such a literary writer that her book on man and geography was considered as one of the best literary contributions in geography, and has stood the test of time, and even today is used as a reference book. She was a staunch determinist, and and spread the concepts of the organic theory, etc. of Raztel. So she was so much of an influence in the American geography circles, and also all over the world. So much so that Raztel himself was so impressed with her that he traveled to America, and there was a process of what was called as Raztelization of America. That is when the likes of Isaac Bowman, also who was indirectly a Raztel student, but then he moved on from determinism to possibilism. That's a different thing. But Raztel continued to have that indefinitive impact on the American school of thought as far as geography was concerned. And then we had Huntington, Ellsworth Huntington. He wrote a book on Pulse of Asia, and he was one of the first to draw the impact of climate on man, and he has written a very interesting book related to how the climate influences the various vegetation types and the biotic regions in America. And then we had Burrows, Harlan Burrows, who for the first time said geography should also be looked at as human ecology. And he laid a lot of stress on geography as a field subject, and he said the geography of field, for a geographer, field is a laboratory to learn, and this is how one geographer can learn the impact of the environment on man. So his contribution for geography as human ecology had a lot of impact and a lot of takers. And of course, Carl Saar, he was the man who said geography is nothing but chorology, and he was the one who gave a much broader picture of what the Daviesian cycle of erosion was, and he showcased how the human element has superimposed these anthropogenic activities on the landforms, and how once the landforms are studied, one can go back and look at the past and see what all changes man has brought on the way the landforms have evolved. And then we had Ralph Brown, who wrote on the mirrors of American geography, and proved how the past is very important in understanding the present features as we see. Then of course Whitley brought in a new concept of what is called as sequent occupancy, wherein like Brown and Saar, he said that there is a forebearer, and then the present, and then there is an offspring. So there is this kind of evolution that you have a past and you also have a future, that is forebearer, presenter, and the offspring. And then of course U.S.A. Bowman, whom I said, brought in the concept of possibilism without straight away rejecting environmental determinism. So he was an evolved man. He was also one of the forerunners of how he explained the importance of geopolitics, and the way he moved and understood the relationship between America and all the neighboring countries, and he brought in geography to explain the importance of the geopolitics. So his contribution is also immense, and he brought in this concept of possibilism, and he said there are the environment throws up a lot of possibilities. It is for the man with his own innovative thinking based on his traditions and background, on how he chooses the available possibilities and moves on and reshapes the landscape, and also impacts and develops what is in and around him, not only within his own country but also when it comes to the countries which he is dealing in trade and commerce. So that is all about these 10 geographers, which I just gave one-liner contributions. I will show you a little more detailed contributions of each of them in the slideshow, and so just have a look at the slideshow. So now we'll see the contribution of each of the American geographers in a little more detail. So this is the list of the 10 very important geographers who contributed immensely to the field of geography. This is geography. This is Jeffrey Martin's book on the all possible worlds, and previously also he has written some very acclaimed books related to geography. And but another very important book of his is Towards Geographical Science, and it is actually the making and the capstone of Martin's career when he finally released this book. The book is dominated by physical geography of the one written by Martin. Now we come to the one of the most prolific impact geographer in America, that is Devlin Davies. He was considered as father of U.S. geography. As I said, he was a full professor at the Harvard University for a lot of time, and he was an advocate of geography as Eridukunde as defined by Richter, and Landerkunde as defined and elaborated by Hetner. In short, he was firmly of the belief that geography is science, and he played a very important role in his balancing the way he forwarded the works in geology as well as in geography. So ironically, his physical geography was so successful that various other disciplines such as geomorphology, on which he laid so much stretch, and the climatology were just spin-offs. So we all know his contribution about the concept of cycle of erosion. He kept it simple. His formula was for landform evolution. It is based on a combined interaction between the structure or the surface of the rock, the agency of landform change, that is the process. It could be any process, that is any agency or any agent of landform, that water, air, glaciers, karst, or anything. And finally the stage, which is the part of the sequence of landform which has finally changed, and changed at a particular time as it is seen now. And then Davis defended the concept of cycle of erosion with such rigor and persuasiveness that it became almost universally accepted as the most standard working model of landforms. So he also contributed, as I said, in the curriculum of geography, bringing it to the American school system by bringing in a paradigm shift from simply memorizing geography to teaching geography as a system of science. and thanks to Davies, USA had continued for a very long time to be oriented towards a deterministic perspective. Mark Jefferson deserves a special place in the history of American geography because of the way he enkindled and brought in so much of enthusiasm for learning of geography among the students, but also for many of his contributions to the conceptual structure of geography that came from his wonderful writings. He insisted that the focus of geography teaching should be the man on the earth, in that order, not the earth and man. So Jefferson's geography, in contrast to Davies, was a man-centered geography. That is, it was human first and the physical later, unlike Daviesian, which said it is physical, based on which the humans developed. So to Jefferson, the nature of geography is a fact that they are discoverable because of the causes of distributions and the relations between the distributions. That is where he brings in this very novel concept of geography being both an art on the one side and science on the other side. Then we had this Ellsworth Huntington. He was a very imaginative interpreter of the effects of climate on human life. He wrote that book of Pulse of Asia, where he correlates the periods of drought with historical dates, and he developed an hypothesis that the great migrations and invasions of the nomadic people of Central Asia resulted in the Mongol conquest of China and India, and these invasions also over the Eastern Europe could be explained by dry climatic spells, which led to the dying of the pastures that formed the backbone of nomadic economy, and that is how they started migrating. And then the contribution of Ellen Churchill Semple. She was a master's degree in history. I told you the small story of how determined she was to go and learn from Raztel. Her book on the American history and its geographical condition was immediate success. It became so popular and confirmed her as a status of eminent teacher of both history and geography. She took Raztel's work not only to America, as I said, to the entire world, and had mesmerized a generation of students by her persuasive writing and her enchanting literary style, backed by convincing scholarship based on the evidences she has brought in whatever she wrote. In her book entitled Influences of Geographical Environment, the opening paragraph of the book itself sets the tone and style, the way it had impacted so many of the geographers, at least my contemporaries. We all definitely remember this particular opening paragraph when she says, "Man is not just a child of the earth, dust of a dust, but that the earth has mothered him, fed him, set him to task, directed his thoughts, confronted him with difficulties that have strengthened his body and sharpened his wits." So this is the famous quote. Quote can come like this in your exam, and maybe you will be asked to explain. So this is a very popular and a very well known quote. So you should grasp this. She was very authoritative in her literary style. So it actually, when you are reading her book, it hits you somewhere, and then you start reading more of what is written. So she had described her own method of study as comparative. Her method of research has been to compare typical people of all races and all stages of cultural development living under same geographic conditions. So these similarities she felt were due to environment and not to race. So she was very clear on her man-environment thesis, which was clearly probabilistic in approach. That is, while environmental determinism was the backdrop on which the man has developed his physical traits based on the geographic condition, she also said that man evolved based on the possibilities created And so that's why it is between possibilism and determinism, what she calls as probabilism. Then contribution Harlan Burrows, he said geography should be treated as a human ecology because he's proposed that there could be specialized branches of geography which should be abandoned, and he underlined that man's adaptation to the conditions in his habit is not caused by the physical environment. On the contrary, he said that this is the adaptation which is a function of human choice, and the central idea behind it being the concept of possibilism. He emphasized the need for intensive fieldwork and regarded a thoroughly effective technique of fieldwork is of immediate need, since in his view the field represented the geographer's laboratory. Then Carl Sauer, he is one of the greatest proponents of geography as chorology. When there was a dissatisfaction among students about the content and the various methodologies of geography, here comes Carl Sauer from University of California at Berkeley with his book, The Morphology of Landscape. So, following Humboldt and Hettner, he defined geography as the study of things associated in an area on the Earth's surface and the difference in the nature of aerial aggregations from place to place in regard to both physical as well as cultural factors. Sauer's concept of landscape included the features of the natural area and the form superimposed on the physical landscape by the activities of man. And he said, like all other processes or agents which sculpt and change the orientation of landscape, man is also a similar agent, the latest agent in fashioning the landscape. So the purpose of geography, according to him, is chorology, which was defined as the study of development of cultural landscape out of the natural landscape. So this is an important quote. Remember, Carl Sauer giving this, that the development of cultural landscape out of the natural landscape. So morphology of landscape required a historical perspective. He said past is equally important in understanding the cultural landscape which the man has created. So a keen historical insight was viewed as an essential part of the methodology pursued by Sauer and his students. Later on, geographers also take up this idea of understanding the past. You remember the Daviesian concept, past is the key to the future. So the major tenets of Sauer's chronological perspective in the study of landscape morphology are: first is the description, and then the focus is just not on human activities per se, but on material features of the landscape resulting from man's activities. How man has shaped the landscape is equally important. That can be understood only through an historical perspective of learning what has happened in the past, what were the various occupations of the man, how and why he changed the landscape to what it is today. Then Ralph Brown, he wrote a path-breaking book entitled Mirror of the Americans. He portrayed the geography of the eastern seaboard of the North American continent for the period around 1820 on the basis of statement contained in the writings of several geographers. So he basically tried to compile everything what was already available and written by several geographers in the past, and he with his imaginative approach was able to recreate the past geography of a particular region in terms of how the contemporary scholars are. So he bridged what the contemporary scholars saw or looked at the landform and said, and how the previous geographers looked at the past of that landform and what they said. So that is how he tried to merge these perceptions and then create a kind of a mirror for Americans, and that is the description of geography of the region by combining the past and the present. And then Whittlesey, he described many studies focused upon the process of change in the settlement of an area. That is what, as I said, he meant sequent occupancy. He said each generation of human occupancy is linked to its forebearer, that is to its past, and also to its offspring. Similar to what the other geographers said, that there is a link between the past, the present, and the future. So this sequent occupancy studies represented a kind of a different kind of determinism, what was termed as cultural determinism. There can be short notes on this type of terms, cultural determinism. Remember Whittlesey and how he linked the forebearer and the offspring as each generation of human occupancy. So this sequent occupancy studies represented a kind of cultural determinism, in that they had stated with the premise that with every significant change in attitudes or objectives and technical skills of the inhabitants of an area, the resource base of the region is put to fresh appraisal. So this is the crux of the concept of what was termed as cultural determinism. And then last but not the least, Isaiah Bowman. So his famous quote is again very important in the examination point of view, because he brings in a lot of citizenship involvement, the geopolitics, in the relation between nations and all that. So his quote is, "Citizenship comes first today in our crowded world. No man can enjoy the privileges of education and thereafter, with a clear conscience, break his contract with society. To respect that contract, it is to be mature, to strengthen it, to be a good citizen, to do more than your share under its noble life." So this is a famous quote. He served as the president of the famous illustrious Johns Hopkins University and at the Department of Geography. He was the professor there. He was influential in terms of the national policy of the U.S., and his standout achievement was in transforming the American Geographical Society into a scholarly institution of high repute, particularly in geography. He was instrumental in establishing the field of human geography as political geography, and he brought in the concept of geopolitics into part of geography. So an example of his work in this regard is the contribution called the Pioneer Fringe, in which he commented on historians' inference in the U.S. Census Bureau's decision to not map a frontier line as the settlements were isolated. So this is from the geopolitics point of view. Isaiah Bowman contribution is quite important, and also important because the way he, without hurting the sentiments of the determinists, showed how possibilism is much more realistic. So the work developed after the field work in Garfield Country, Montana, in this aspect. The Bowman elucidated how knowledge of geography in the early settlers would have contributed to better social and political policies. He also commented on how, just like the early settlers in America, those indulging in commercial and industrial occupations must also have a knowledge of geography as a vital component of their life. So he took geography to a different level, both at the social and at the political level, and also said those involved in political and also economic trade should have the knowledge of geography, so to better understand the deep dive along the deeper currents of what the geography is influencing the way man acts and man behaves and takes forward whatever is good for the society at that time. So that's all, guys. This is these 10 geographers. Each one of them is important. I've not touched on Harshon. I will, when we talk about the Harshon-Scoffer debate, that will be a separate session. You all should understand what are the points on which Hartshorne was debating and why Copper came in and challenged him and all that. So that I will interact with you separately. In the next video, I will do the contributions of the Russian geographers, and we will end these contributions there. We are moving on very well. I am very happy the way students are going through some of these videos and asking me questions and all that. So these points, whatever I am giving, is the crux or the essence from all the 3 books and some of the inputs from journals which I have been sharing with my home students. So study well, stay focused, and just keep revising whatever I have interacted with you on all these videos. I just have one more video on this series, that is the contribution of Russians. So guys, bye and take care.